first want to give my great thanks to Netroots Nation for inviting me here today and to share the stage with these amazing activists and leaders. I don't need to say to you tonight that we're in trouble in this country. The very people who have been ignored, taken for granted, discounted, and dehumanized are the very ones that are going to save us all. The people who are most deeply affected and harmed by the cruel policies and practices of this country are the ones that are poised to be courageous candidates and elected officials, to be the strategists and the voters. I'm talking about the saving graces of our democracy. I'm talking about women of color. Women of color are leading a multiracial Democratic coalition that will win in swing states and beyond in this year and in 2020. And those victories are not simply about electing more Democrats, although that's very important. We, women of color, have bigger plans for the nation. We're seeking economic and racial justice. We want a country where people can live lives of dignity, and that means full access to health care, housing, and education. And this means living into a democracy we've dreamed of, but not yet realized. It's a politics that we have not yet seen. So how will all of this come into view? Let me tell you, I've launched She the People, a call to our nation to elevate women of color fully into their fierce and loving leadership and collective power. She the People fully recognizes that women of color are leading inclusive, multiracial coalitions that will transform our country's politics. She the People tells a story of the remarkable candidates that have been on this stage tonight and elsewhere, and the voters and strategies that are offering us a hopeful way out of the current crisis that we find ourselves in. This is not the end of our democracy. And despite the horrifying daily news, there is something happening in our country. Women of color are showing the nation that we are on a cusp of a progressive and political new era in America. So 2016 was not the end of the story. Ironically, it marked a beginning. And we at Democracy in Color, well before 2016, we introduced a revolutionary concept in politics, namely that the key to securing a progressive future for our country is the new American majority, the multiracial coalition of voters that elected Barack Obama. You see, people of color are now 38% of our population, and soon will be the majority of people. So as a group, we're growing fast, and we are the most progressive voters and the most reliable Democrats. So it's been, yes. Now, it's been a tough work these last few years to convince the political strategists and donors and party leaders to change their assumptions and their biases about what it takes to win elections. It was difficult to get resources for voter engagement and voter turnout for communities of color. For example, just as a reminder, in 2016, Democrats spent 75% of their billions plus war chest going after white, moderate, and conservative voters, and we know how that turned out. Now Trump is president, we lost both houses of Congress. And one stat says so much. 85% of married white women voted for Trump. 53% voted, of all white women voted for Trump. And Trump and the Republicans won and we lost. So the old playbook that led to that is dead. And here's where the new story begins. Out of the rubble of the old democratic practices, new and beautiful possibilities are emerging. So let me tell you a story. Last summer, I traveled to southern Georgia, Albany, to witness Stacey Abrams declare her candidacy for governor of Georgia. I already knew Stacey as one of the most brilliant strategists of the new American majority, that she was building a campaign that was for the first time in a decade turned Georgia blue by speaking to the most progressive voters in the state. She was reaching out to voters that were normally ignored by both parties. Over 1 million people of color eligible to vote, more than half of whom were women. But the powers that be didn't believe a Black woman could win in Georgia, let alone demonstrate the new American majority strategy could win. So they cynically recruited a white millionaire moderate, also named Stacey, that they believed would appeal to white moderate voters in the state. Early on, Stacey Abrams built her campaign strategy around engaging and energizing those millions of voters of color in the state of Georgia, a state that's almost majority people of color. Georgia is also a state where 42% of the registered Democrats are Black women. And boy, did that strategy deliver in the primary. Our Stacey brought 199,000 additional Democrats into the primary than previous years. Stacey Abrams, the candidate that the Georgia Democratic Party and the Democratic Governors Association and the so-called experts believed was unelectable just a year ago, has emerged as our best hope to recapture that state in the Deep South. And she is doing it in a way that makes our democracy stronger by engaging more voters, and with a platform that supports reproductive justice and Medicare expansion and LGBT rights. Stacey Abrams knew what the Democrats now need to know, that the new American majority, led by women of color, is the keystone to victory. Here's something else I have to tell you about Georgia. Now that the GOP has chosen the former Secretary of State, the one that's behind shameless voter suppression and is an anti-immigrant enemy of our communities, there's Hidden Figures crafting a new multiracial Democratic coalition building infrastructure and engagement in Georgia. These heroes are women of color. It's Joanna Thompson, it's Stephanie Cho, it's Latasha Brown, it's Marisa Franco. These are the women behind a strategy that did this. It increased Asian American turnout 6 times and Latinx turnout 4 times in the state of Georgia for the primary. And it wasn't until Stacey Abrams' landslide victory that many in the Democratic establishment started to believe. So, we at She the People are telling the story of Stacey Abrams and the legion of women of color running for office this year, because in them, and they are the hope of our nation. She the People is telling the stories about how women of color are going to save our democracy. And right now, in swing states like Arizona, Florida, New Mexico, Virginia, and now Mississippi, places that Trump won, women of color are leading the charge by engaging new and younger voters and people of color. Yes. We understand that our swing voters are not the ones moving from red to blue. Our swing is from non-voter to voter. Right now, Latina, Asian American, Native American, and Arab American women are poised to lead victories for progressives running in states like Georgia, Florida, and Texas. Women of color are claiming space in blue districts where tired old moderates aren't fighting for us, and challenging the GOP in places like Southern California, where the majority of women are Black and brown and the majority of voters are women. And speaking of excellent candidates, She the People is not just calling 2018 the year of women of color for nothing. Women of color are already leading the most vibrant racial and social justice movements of our day, from Families Belong Together to Black Lives Matter to Time's Up, are running for office and appealing to a multiracial base in districts across the nation. Women of color are the most underrepresented group of leaders in our nation and the most likely to face primary challenges by Democrats, and they're finding new paths to leadership. So it's not just Stacey Abrams, it's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who beat a 10-term Democrat in New York. It's the progressive Rashida Tlaib running in Detroit, Michigan, who would be our first Muslim congresswoman. It's Deb Haaland, who would be our first Native woman in Congress, progressive from New Mexico. It's Ayanna Pressley, a congressional candidate from Boston. It's Kim Koko Iwamoto, who would be our first Asian American transgender woman lieutenant governor in Hawaii. It's Cori Bush in Missouri running in next week's primary for Congress, and it's Gina Ortiz Jones, Filipina veteran from San Antonio, Texas. I'm telling you, there are thousands of Stacys across our nation, and this is what She the People is about. It's supporting the political leadership and the wisdom of women of color. So I'm here to tell you, there's hope in 2018. And so much can and will be won in the midterms and realizing justice in our nation. So listen, progressives. And frankly, you too, Democratic Party, get in formation behind women of color. And She the People is here for all of us. So I ask you, will you be here for all of us? Say yes, and together we'll win.